That Wednesday night was quieter than I could remember. Andre, my husband, had traveled for a work commitment that would last almost a week. He was excited about the opportunity, and I tried to hide how much I didn't like the idea of being alone for so long. When he left, I forced a smile, gave him a kiss, and wished him luck, even though my chest tightened. The first few days were quiet. I worked from home, binge-watched a few series, and even took a few walks around the neighborhood to pass the time. But on the third day, things changed. The silence, which at first seemed nice, started to bother me. The house, which had always been my favorite place, suddenly seemed colder, as if something was missing. Before we start, make sure you've subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories, and now let's go. That quiet night, I was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket with my cup of hot tea. Everything seemed calm until the doorbell rang, breaking the silence in a way that made me jump in fright. My heart raced for a moment. Who would knock on the door at that hour? I looked out the window, trying to imagine who it could be, but I didn't see anything suspicious. Taking a deep breath, I went to the door and opened it slowly. To my surprise, it was Ricardo, an old friend of Andre's. He was standing there, with his warm smile and a bottle of wine in his hands. "Hi, Marina. I thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing," he said with that naturalness that only he had. "Oh, Ricardo, what a surprise," I replied, a little awkwardly but trying to seem at ease. "You didn't have to bother." Even though I felt a little uncomfortable, I invited him in. Ricardo and Andre had been friends for years, but to be honest, I had never spent much time alone with him. Our conversations had always been quick, at dinners or crowded gatherings. So having him there in the living room of my house without Andre was strange. Strange, but also intriguing. We sat on the couch and he opened the bottle of wine while I grabbed 2 glasses from the kitchen. The sound of wine being poured filled the air and we soon began to talk. To my surprise, the conversation flowed easily. He started talking about his work and asked about mine, showing genuine interest. Then we moved on to funny stories from the past, some that I had already heard from Andre and others completely new to me. I couldn't remember laughing so much in the last few days. Ricardo had a captivating way of telling stories, with gestures and expressions that made you pay attention to every word. It was as if he was there to remind me that even in solitude there was room for light moments. Over time, I noticed something different in the way he looked at me. It wasn't just the look of a friend. It was intense, but at the same time subtle, as if he wanted to understand me beyond the words. He listened to every sentence I said with an attention that disconcerted me, as if I were the most interesting person in the world at that moment. Despite everything, there was nothing explicit, but the mood seemed different. I felt intrigued, confused, and, in a way, flattered. As the night wore on, that simple, unexpected visit turned into something I knew I would remember for a long time. As the clock approached midnight, I let out a polite smile as I thanked Ricardo for his company, and let him know that it was time to rest. Of course. I don't want to disturb your sleep," he replied, standing up with a calm movement. "It was really nice talking to you, Marina. We should do this more often." I followed him to the door, and when I closed it, I stood there for a moment, staring at the silence that had once again taken over the house. I felt a mixture of relief and something I couldn't define. Something about that visit seemed to have a different meaning, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly why. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. It wasn't fear or anxiety, but a restlessness that seemed to hang in the air. While I was making my coffee, Ricardo's visit invaded my thoughts. The conversation, the laughter, and mainly the way he looked at me insisted on repeating itself in my mind. It was strange because he was just a friend of Andre's, wasn't he? Nothing more. To try to shake off the discomfort, I threw myself into my work. But as I typed on the computer, my eyes wandered to the couch where we had talked. It looked different. as if it held the echo of that night, and the empty wine bottle on the counter seemed like a silent reminder of everything that had happened. It was already late when I decided to organize the cabinets, trying to fill the day with anything that occupied my mind. It was at that moment that I heard the sound of my cell phone vibrating on the table. I picked up the phone and saw a message from Ricardo. "I hope I didn't bother you yesterday. I enjoyed talking to you." I stared at the screen, not knowing how to respond. I wrote a quick reply, but deleted it. I tried another sentence and deleted it again. Finally, I sent something simple. "Of course not." It was nice to have company. It didn't take long for him to respond. "If it's okay, I'd like to come back tomorrow. There's something about Andre that I forgot to tell you. I want your opinion. Can allowing another man in my house alone be considered cheating? Even though he is my husband's friend, I don't think it's valid. Leave a comment so I can find out and we can continue the story." I read the message a few times, trying to understand. Why didn't he tell me the day before? Why the urgency? Even though it was a seemingly innocent message, something about it made my heart beat faster. I didn't know if it was the tone, the moment, or that strange feeling he had left in me, but I knew that the next few hours would be long while I tried to decide what to reply. I hesitated. A part of me wanted to refuse, to dismiss any possibility of something out of the ordinary. But another, driven by an inexplicable curiosity or, who knows, by the desire for company, ended up giving in. "It's okay. I'll be here tomorrow." After sending the message, I spent the rest of the day trying to divert my thoughts from that reunion. It was no big deal, right? It was just a conversation with my husband's friend. Even so, I found myself cleaning the house with unusual care the next day. I moved the pillows around, cleaned the table in the living room, and, without planning, prepared a simple dinner that looked sophisticated enough not to seem too casual. When the doorbell rang, my heart skipped a beat. I took a deep breath before opening the door, and there he was. Ricardo was holding a bag of food and smiling in a relaxed way that seemed to contrast with the tension I felt. "I brought you something for dinner. I hope you don't mind," he said, entering with the same naturalness he had displayed the night before. We sat down at the table, and the conversation began easily, as if we were old friends. But this time there was something different in the air. Every laugh seemed to carry something more, a hidden meaning. Every exchange of glances lasted longer than it should have. When silence finally fell upon us, he looked at me in a way that made time seem to stand still. "Marina, can I be honest?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "Of course," I replied, even though my heart was racing. "Being here with you is harder than I thought. You're special. I've always thought that, but I've never had the chance to say it." I was speechless. My instinct was to interrupt him, to nip the moment in the bud. But a part of me, the same part that had agreed to the reunion, wanted to hear what he had to say. "Ricardo, I think you're reading this all wrong," I said, trying to sound firm, though my voice was shaking. "Maybe," he said, letting out a soft smile. "But I can't ignore how I feel." His words hung in the air, like a cloud that seemed impossible to dispel. My mind whirled, trying to find the right thing to say, but everything felt inadequate. Deep down, I knew this conversation had already crossed a line it shouldn't have. "Ricardo, I think it's best if you go," I finally said, my voice firmer now. He didn't argue. He nodded and stood up slowly, as if he were delaying the inevitable. Before he left, he stopped at the door and looked at me one more time. "Please take care of yourself. And I'm sorry." I closed the door behind him, leaning against it as a whirlwind of emotions washed over me. Sadness, relief, regret, all at once. I knew I had done the right thing, but that didn't make the decision any easier. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on work and my routine, but it was impossible to ignore Ricardo's traces. The bottle of wine was still in the kitchen. The sofa where we sat seemed to hold the echo of our conversations. It was as if he was still there, present in every detail. This experience left me with something I couldn't explain. It showed how vulnerable we are to feelings we don't always understand, and how easy it is to cross boundaries when hidden emotions start to surface. As difficult as it was, I knew I had to move on, carrying with me the lessons of that confusing yet remarkable moment. Do you think I made the right choice in not allowing something to happen to me even though I allowed my husband's friend to come to my house? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you want to see more stories like these, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our content.